Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Deb Otis. It is my pleasure to welcome you to FairVote's webinar today with Ismar Volić, a professor of mathematics and author of a new book, Making Democracy Count: How Mathematics Improves Voting, Electoral Maps, and Representation. I am Deb. I'm the Director of Research and Policy at FairVote, and I'm going to be your host for about the next 45 minutes today. We're also going to post a recording of this webinar later on FairVote's YouTube channel. So today we're going to be talking about this new book from Ismar, which has earned well-deserved praise for introducing a mathematical framework for thinking about elections. So we're diving into the nerdy side of things a little bit today. And of course, let me add my praise for this book to everything that's already been said. I found this clear and thought-provoking. This translates mathematical concepts so every reader can understand it. I was impressed by how thoughtful this was. It walks people through its analysis and its conclusions, from how we elect representatives to how many representatives we should have to how we draw our districts. So I'm just thrilled to have this opportunity to have this conversation with Ismar today. As he and I chat, we want to be sure you all have the opportunity to ask questions. We're all Zoom experts by now. You know how this goes. Just go ahead and leave questions in the Q&A box at any time, and we will pose as many of those as we can get to Ismar as we go. So first up, Ismar, welcome. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us why you chose to write this book?
Thank you so much, Deb, for having me. This is really a treat for me, and just, you know, FairVote is an organization that I admire for a long time because you straddle this sort of academic and reform work so well and in such a wonderful way. So as a researcher, as an academic, I appreciate all the good, fantastic research you do. So I am a mathematician, and hopefully that's not too scary to folks. My research is in something called algebraic topology, where I've written books and papers on the topic over the last 20 years or so. But about 7 or 8 years ago, as many of my colleagues have, we realized we had something to say, that a lot of these democratic processes that we think of, you know, the foundational kind of infrastructure of democracy, you know, voting, apportionment, districting, et cetera, they are really mathematical in nature, right? And that we had something to contribute to the discourse. So I started teaching this class. You know, a not so well hidden secret is that if you want to learn about something in academia, you teach a class on it. So I started teaching a class on math and politics, and was just kind of smitten with the subject. And I have been teaching it since. And in the meantime, I also founded this Institute for Mathematics and Democracy, which I run to this day. In fact, now might be a good time. I will drop the link in the chat so people can see all the wonderful things that we do. But what was eye-opening for me is this, through my work with students and people involved with this institute, is how much of a need there was for an approach to our, you know, ailing democracy, where we can all agree that democracy is in trouble these days, but an approach that was really not partisan, apolitical, objective, even formal in some sense. Actually, the right word might be even detached from politics and emotion. And I really do mean this in a positive. Detachment is not necessarily a good thing usually, but in this sense, in this situation, it is. And what's more detached than mathematics? Again, I really mean this in a good way in this situation. So all of these experiences and stuff I had learned over the course of past some number of years, I felt like I should put in a book and sort of put my spin on it, and hopefully bring the mathematical point of view closer to people. So that was the impetus.
Wonderful. So Ismar, if you don't mind, I'm going to pepper you with a few questions, and then to our audience members, if you have questions as we go, please drop them in the Q&A. So Ismar, in the book, you mentioned that you immigrated to the US from Bosnia in the 1990s when that country was experiencing a war. So can you tell us more about how that informed your approach to democracy and to representation?
Well, it informed it in the sense that I actually, you know, had this need to get involved in this work. I could no longer, seeing what's happening in the United States, I could no longer kind of sit in my, you know, office here, proving theorems and writing books that only a handful of people would would read, which is fine too. That has merit as well. But I felt like having seen a complete breakdown of democracy and what it can lead to, there was an urgency that I felt that I needed to act. So for many thousands of wonderful people who are trying to better this democracy, a demise of society and democracy may be abstract and sort of a little bit removed, right? They can maybe imagine it, but it probably doesn't compute quite the same way that it does for me. Like I have seen, a horrible war, right, as the end result of a breakdown of democracy, complete with every atrocity you can imagine and every kind of suffering you can imagine. And then I started seeing traces of what had led to the Bosnian War here in the United States, right? The rise of populism. I'm not saying anything new to anybody here, but I could really see the rhetoric, that those parallels in the rhetoric that was accusatory and polarizing, and these initially kind of shrouded, sort of cloaked calls for violence that became more and more explicit. All of this has been happening in the United States for so many years, and it's really unnerving and is kind of spurring me to action.
Thank you. I do think you made a good job. You did a good job of making this book accessible. I do think you're going to get more than just a couple of readers on this one. Even just as I was reading through this, a lot of the chapter titles were sometimes bordering on kind of silly, which made this feel nothing at all like a math textbook. And I mean that in the kindest possible way. And so tell us about what audience you had in mind. Like, who's the ideal reader for this book?
So yeah, thank you. I'm glad you said that, because I did try to spend a lot of time to make this as friendly, as readable as possible. I know there's limitations, right? The word mathematics is on the cover. That means I've alienated most people immediately, right? They will just not go anywhere near it. But for those who crack open the book, I hope there would be something engaging and that would draw them in. That wasn't too technical, that wasn't too formal. The mathematics itself in this book is actually really it doesn't really go much beyond arithmetic, right? This stuff can be understood and discussed at the basic mathematical level. So I think of this book as, pop math. That's actually a genre, believe it or not, a pop math book. So I meant for it to be accessible to anybody who cares about democracy, who's not afraid to engage with a little bit of mathematics. So I really had kind of a broad, interested audience that cared about the state of democracy.
Well, this might be a good time to take an audience question that I think is related here. So someone named John in the audience has said they're planning to offer a book study group with this book to local League of Women Voters folks and FairVote groups. And so they're asking if you have any exercises you would share that might be especially good for sharing these ideas with groups of non-math people.
I do. They're not posted anywhere accessible, but I can certainly make them available. So you should just contact me. Yeah, by the way, if you just Google my name, my website will come up, and all kinds of materials, and my email will come up. So this is very exciting. We mathematicians are not used to this kind of attention, right? Again, we hide in our little offices and do math on paper. So when I realize that somebody's actually interested in what I just did, I'm just like very excited to help. So please reach out. I have lots of materials. A lot of them come from this class that I teach, because the book is an outgrowth of that class. So I have all kinds of exercises that go along with a lot of things.
Amazing. And so after a lot of the exploration of the math concepts behind, you analyzed these different voting methods, you really dug deep into some of these questions, and then you pronounced a winner among the single winner voting methods. But it took 140 pages of analysis before you got to the winner. Spoiler alert, the winner was what we call ranked choice voting, also known as instant runoff voting. Tell us why you chose to crown a winner at all, and why you decided to spend so much time leading up to that reveal.
That really is a fantastic question, because I struggled with this a lot and thought about this a lot. It was probably the hardest chapter, or once I decided to write it was okay, but it was hard. So and I had the way I presented in an earlier version of the book, I said, I think instant runoff is the winner because David Byrne supports it, and that's good enough for me. But the editor thought that was a little too facetious, so she took it out. But here's the backstory. As I'm sure the audience here knows, there are various voting methods out there, and they can produce different winners, right? Even for the same ranked ballots, right? So if we all go and rank some candidates in a ranked choice election, that's the ranked choice part, right? What comes next is the tallying of the votes, right? And you can do that in various ways. Instant runoff is just one of those ways. You can assign points to the rankings. You can do pairwise comparisons of candidates, right? There are different methods. And these methods have been known for hundreds of years. And they can produce different winners. And this is key. Now, for someone who is out there trying to reform democracy and bring better voting systems into place, this is very frustrating. Okay, this is annoying. The ideal situation would be that all of these methods produce the same winner always. So who cares? Just use one of them, whichever one is the most convenient. But that's not the case. From an academic point of view, this is very exciting because something interesting is going on. There is content to this theory. There is something that we need to study and understand, right? And this is how the entire theory of social choice was born back in the 50s, and people have studied these voting methods for decades and proved theorems about them and tried to figure out which one is best, right? But of course, to say which one is best, you have to know what best means mathematically. So defining best turned out to be a problem. And, this is decades and decades of research. Now, I felt that this is not sufficient for the moment that we're in. I could have presented all these voting methods as I do and talked about their advantages and disadvantages and kind of left it at that. It is not a job of a mathematician to say this thing is better than this thing. These are different things. They're different methods. They have different advantages and disadvantages, and I would normally leave it at that, right? You don't ask, which, I'll get a little nerdy for 2 seconds. You have, for example, a quadratic function, x squared, right? So that's good for modeling parabolic motion or something like that, right? You have a sine function, a trig function, that's good at describing wavy motion, right? Sound waves or anything like that. I would not pit those two against each other. They are each good for a certain purpose, and there's no need to compare them. However, here we're talking about implementing something in the real world that's so consequential and so important, like a voting method, that I felt the need to really look at things from a slightly different angle, and that is actually compare the voting systems and their advantages and disadvantages. Turns out, instant runoff is the best. It does a great job of many things. It's not perfect. We have to be honest about that. But the ways in which it's not perfect, we have evidence now from all kinds of ranked choice voting elections that have occurred in the US over the past decade or two, Scotland, Australia, lots in California. We have data from New York as well now. So all those potential ways in which instant runoff could have messed up a little bit or produced weird results or paradoxical results, they are extremely rare. So that's an empirical angle that's been brought into the picture as of recently. So this is why I felt confident in saying instant runoff is the way we should do things. It captures the will of the majority in a really good way, and we don't have to worry about any of these negative things.
Well, to build on that, let me pull another question out of our Q&A from an audience member. They ask, advocates for other voting methods, they mentioned range and approval voting advocates, are already vociferous advocates for their preferred methods. And so I think your book lays it all out for people that are coming to this fresh, maybe a blank slate and first analyzing this. But what would you say, or how would you have this conversation with someone who is already pretty familiar with this field, the electoral methods, and they've come to a different conclusion than you?
Well, I guess I would lay out the evidence the way I do in this book. And again, I would return to this is really recent work, last 5 years or 7 years, that shows that things like, again, let me just get a tiny bit nerdy. So the advocates of range voting or approval voting point to things like failure of monotonicity in ranked choice voting, or irrelevance of independence of relevant alternatives. These formal kind of theoretical ways in which, or that it doesn't really, if you define spoiler correctly, it doesn't really eliminate spoiler, right? So they point to these things. Well, my answer is that the evidence really shows now that these really occur way infrequently for us to be worried about any of this. Whereas these other systems fail on a human level, right? They're all susceptible to strategic voting. People are imperfect, and they make things like approval voting, rage voting imperfect. There's nothing we can do about that, right? It's not a matter of math. So that would be my argument, sort of the reality that these other systems are not meant for people because people are not perfect versus the other systems that really we have solid evidence that they work vast majority of the time and work well.
Wonderful. Another audience question, and thank you to everyone keeping these questions going. These are great so far. We have a question from Dale, who is the secretary of a ranked choice voting organization, Rank the Vote Delaware. And so Dale asks, is your book written from an apolitical point of view so that it can be used to convince people of all political backgrounds?
That was my intent. I hope it is. I think it is. And again, if you're going to, so of course I have my own political preferences and views, but I have been trained over the decades that I've been a mathematician to be able to remove myself from this. Why? Because mathematics is like that, right? Mathematics is a formal, otherworldly system that operates within its own set of rules, right? Again, detachment might be a good word here, right? So I know how to detach myself from reality and work in a universal abstract language of mathematics. I'm used to that. My brain can do this. It's just a matter of training. And I hope I've brought this up to the narrative in this book. I really have tried hard. I've been mindful of choosing examples from every sort of every side of political spectrum, and it's not hard. Like when you really get down to mathematics of these things, it has nothing to do with ideology and politics and parties. It's just math. So it's really not even hard to be apolitical.
And I thought you did a good job at that. As I was reading this, it felt to me like you were very balanced. You were not taking sides. You were not picking a party or picking no parties. And so I do think that this would work well for people with a lot of different political backgrounds, as long as they have an open mind and they come to it wanting to learn. Can I pivot our conversation to gerrymandering? Partway through the book, you have a section called Math versus Gerrymandering. And I thought that was great, because it does feel like all of our redistricting battles these days are fought with math. I mean, in the Supreme Court, the methods of analyzing districts have gotten more rigorous. Expert witnesses in court cases are mathematicians. And so tell us more about why mathematical techniques are so necessary.
Right. So gerrymandering is an incredible example of how mathematics that is for centuries lived as kind of this abstract, its own thing, how it gets applied in a really cool, interesting way. This happens with some frequency, and it's always to our delight, right? We like doing math in its own right and for its own sake, but when there's an application like the districting, it's really cool. So gerrymandering, the math of gerrymandering is one of the most prolific areas of research these days, and it started about 15 years ago when some people had these cool ideas, and it's one of the reasons why I got into this, because I realized, wait, there's math can do this. The reason why it's necessary to bring math into the picture is that it's just gerrymandering is just too complicated, basically, right? Gerrymanderers have gotten really good at sort of drawing districts that pass the the eyeball test, which basically was the test for decades. We clearly needed some more rigorous, some deeper methods and tools to recognize when districts are being drawn with extreme partisan intent, with when it's discriminatory, when it's denying representation to underrepresented groups, etc. So mathematics turns out to have produced a bunch of these tools in the last 10, 15 years. And the courts are, and Deb, you mentioned the courts and expert witnesses. This is something that's incredible. Mathematicians, again, stepping out of our ivory towers and going into the courtroom and assertively speaking about the power of mathematics in this arena is just amazing. That has never really happened before. So yeah, there's really amazing stuff happening in the mathematics, and the courts are getting more used to this. They weren't 10, 15 years ago. You bring the math, and there's this famous, when Roberts in one of the, I think it was the Wisconsin gerrymandering case, when mathematics was brought to bear in this case, this thing called efficiency gap, he was just dismissed it. It's like, because this is like sociological gobbledygook, he called it, right? And it was, it was just awful. The Supreme Court was acting like, like my daughter who's in 8th grade, and she's like, what do I need this for? This is annoying. I hate math, right? This was Supreme Court, right? But I think things are changing a little bit. They're getting used to this idea that really this is a complicated, complex issue, and it has to be tackled with sophisticated techniques that math in combination with data science, statistics, and all these things. And they better get used to it. I mean, there's things like, like AI coming down the pipeline, cryptocurrency, like quantum computing. All these things are going to be coming from the courts, and they're going to require sophisticated thinking to understand.
Well, once we started talking about gerrymandering, our Q&A really blew up. People had a lot of questions about this, so I'm going to pose a couple of these to you. Elliot asks, why do you believe that arguments made before the Supreme Court against partisan gerrymandering have been ineffective? Was there anything else that should have been presented from a mathematical point of view? Or, where would you see these mathematical arguments going in the future?
It's a good question. Depends on the cases. I think there are cases where mathematics played more of a role and less of a role. And I think the trend is that it's playing more of a role. So more mathematicians are writing like amicus briefs, and they're being called upon to testify, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of these mathematical arguments are in and of themselves sort of incomplete. A lot of them are attempts to neatly package gerrymandering into like a single number, a single percentage or something, and that's too simple. It doesn't quite work. So courts have pushed back against this. I think this thing I mentioned, efficiency gap, it's a good kind of red flag, but it can be, and it's not a definitive judgment on whether a district has been gerrymandered or not. So more sophistication has to be brought into play, and I think we're getting there with some of these new techniques that are really kind of data sciencey. So I think if we mathematicians, and organizations like FairVote and all of us, FairVote has done wonderful research with one of the most famous labs that does this gerrymandering, which is in my neighborhood at Tufts University. So yeah, I think we just have to keep pressing on this. I can totally see a change over the last 5-7 years in the way courts are regarding the mathematics of gerrymandering. Hopeful.
Great. We've also got a question from Ray, who was a member of California's Citizen Redistricting Commission. So Ray, thank you so much for serving on that commission. I know those can be a lot of work, and you all did incredible work out there in California on your latest round of maps. And so Ray is commenting that some people just say, oh, we'll draw regular shapes, but this is not good enough. And the commission really needs to focus on the state's communities. So Ismar, as you were studying this, what did you find out about balancing these different considerations for what makes a good district?
Yeah, that's really hard, right? But that's what makes the problem hard. So first of all, you have geography, right? It's not, you're going to plop a bunch of rectangles on the state. It's not going to work, right? Mountain ranges and rivers are going to have different opinion, or like state, county lines and town lines, et cetera. So you're, at the get-go, you have a complicated problem. Then you bring communities of interest into that, the Voting Rights Act. All these things are just, it's an extremely complicated question. But again, there are tools now, modeling tools, sophisticated, computing is getting faster and faster. There are tools that, for example, produce millions of possible maps, and they are better and better at keeping these things in mind, like the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, and communities of interest. California is a little problematic because it's too complicated. It's even more complicated. There are, hundreds of communities of, communities of interest are ill-defined. Math doesn't like ill-defined things, right? That's a problem. So you say communities of interest. So what do you mean by that? That means different things to different, not just people, but states and legislature, et cetera. But these data science tools are getting better and better at capturing this as well, and producing maps that are better than others, right? Producing millions and millions of maps using probabilistic methods. The probabilistic methods have been fed all this information in to the best of the ability of the modeler to produce maps that actually are not or represent people as best as possible. I'm not sure that answers the question, but yeah.
I think that's really helpful, but this also kind of segues us into what I want to talk about next, which is proportional representation systems. You definitely get into that in your book. We've got a question in the chat from Steve. Does your book discuss why gerrymandering with single member districts is so effective because of this threshold of control, and how proportional systems change that threshold? Does your book get into how that threshold matters, and what did you find about that?
Absolutely gets into all that. And you know what, when I talk about multi-member districts and proportional representation, it's like one sentence about gerrymandering, which is gerrymandering is gone. It says no gerrymandering, basically. Every country other than the US and England, I guess, that has single member districts, gerrymandering is just as boring activity. The districting is just as boring as it gets. It's just like administrative, nobody pays attention, and it's just done kind of as a matter of fact, right? So only here has this been elevated to such a blood sport as it is. So yeah, I do get into multi-member districts and how many members is optimal, and 3 to 7, preferably odd numbers. But 3 to 5 is better. And I do go into the history. There's actually a rich history of multi-member districts in the United States, but it was used, unfortunately, in conjunction with a bad voting method. So that's why it was banned on a federal level. Why in the late 60s it was I think it's the late 60s. It was mandated that we have single-member federal districts. But there's a lot of people understood that this was a better way to elect representatives. It's just that it shouldn't have been done with the plurality block voting, which is so if we combined it with the instant runoff or single transferable vote, which is the big brother of instant runoff, that would be an ideal system for us. And there's an act in Congress which FairVote knows a lot about, Fair Representation Act, that someone asked me recently, so and this was started that you can interrupt me anytime you want to feel like I'm talking too much. But the end of my book, it has this chapter that's like half a page long. It's a summary of sort of recommendations, and they are things like use instant runoff in single winner elections if we have to have single winner elections like mayor, governor, whatever. Eliminate the Electoral College, increase the House of Representative size, and use multi-member districts. Someone asked me, like, how optimistic are you about any of these things? And I guess multi-member districts is going to be a tough one, right? Probably not my lifetime. But instant runoff, I mean, there's, we're getting there.
You do acknowledge in your book that proportional representation has had some setbacks in the past. And so even if the folks who read your book are totally persuaded by all of your arguments, and I think they will be, what's next? How do we take that consensus about what would improve our election systems and then turn it into real world change that sustains and is long lasting?
That's actually where I will give an unsatisfying answer, because I don't really know, because I am in this ivory tower, right? I've just started to step out into the real world, and I'm really excited to be in it. But I don't really know how things happen on the ground. What I do see is that there's a lot of local changes that are happening. That seems to be the right way to proceed. Like ranked choice is not going to happen from the top down, right? So one of the consequences of the way we vote now is a duopoly, right? So the Democrats and Republicans, Democrats are sort of ostensibly for it, but they're not going to initiate change from the top. It doesn't feel like it. They're not going to change the system that elected them, right? But there's so many, it's like, I don't even know what the latest count is, 90, 100 municipalities that have ranked choice initiatives happening right now. My son, who's in junior in high school, we live in a town called Natick, which is right next to Wellesley, which is where I'm sitting right now. He and a bunch of his friends have started a ranked choice campaign in Natick, because the way we elect our school board and the town select people, whatever they're called, is in one of these terrible ways, block plurality voting, right? So when there's a slate of candidates and we're picking 4 for the school board, everybody chooses 4 candidates. So it's basically plurality times 4, which with all the terrible things about plurality are just, multiplied in the system. So my son, who's 17 years old, is like, we're gonna try to change this, and he's trying to do it. And Rank the Vote is helping him. He meets regularly with folks from Rank the Vote, and I think that's where I draw my optimism, because that's all I know, right?
That's amazing that you've got your son is involved in this movement now. Do you have career advice that you typically give to students who are developing technical skills in math or other STEM fields, but are also interested in reform?
Definitely. And what I say to them is regardless of whether they will get out there and get involved in reform or anything like that, the interdisciplinarity of what is happening right now is so exciting, academically even, right? And then there's the potential to take it out beyond academia and actually make a difference with it. So there are so many things happening in intersection of STEM and social science, right? So data science being applied to social sciences, computer science being applied to social math, pure mathematics, statistics. There are so I'm in Boston, where there's lots of universities. Every single one of them has a data science major or a data science center, something data science, right? And faculty who are doing applied data science work as it applies to social sciences, social justice, political science, democracy. There's fantastic stuff happening in this intersection. It's really enriching and wonderful to see this. So this is what I tell my students. I said, just get out there and take a bunch of classes in different disciplines that combine these things, see what's possible. Really, I think we are at the precipice of something major happening academically in this field, and then I think it's going to spill out. If you guys will have us, it will spill out into the sort of activism side of things.
Absolutely. I'm so excited for more future collaborations between folks on the reform side and folks on the academic side. We can have such a bigger impact. We can learn so much from each other. This brings me to my next question. You did cite FairVote and our work several times in your book, and thank you. I'm glad that you found our work useful. Since you've let me ask you a whole bunch of questions, it's your turn to ask me for something if you want. What research would you like to see from reform organizations like FairVote? Is there anything you would have liked to cite, but it didn't exist yet?
Oh, that's a good question. Would I like to cite something that didn't exist? What I think should happen more, and it has begun, is really these partnerships, right? Like I was really blown away by research that, again, this metric gerrymandering and geometry lab at Tufts did with FairVote on modeling the Fair Representation Act, modeling multi-member districts, and finding this was really incredible to me that you could even ignore the Voting Rights Act. And not even control for that, and you're going to get districts that actually provide representation to underrepresented groups. That's how effective multi-member districts are. But that required some really hard, this Markov chain, probabilistic ensemble map stuff, all these hard mathematics things that you really needed a hardcore math researcher and a team of such people to bring to fruition. They also modeled, single transferable vote in Cambridge recently using similar methods, and also had some really cool results. So more of these, I don't have anything specific in mind, but more of these collaborations between, and I think what's also important is that both you and us have to advertise these collaborations as crucial and exciting and academically. So there's a little bit of a, this is a culture thing that we on our side have to change a little bit. So the reason I could sort of freely get into thinking about mathematics and democracy and this intersection is because I was kind of settled in my job, in the sense that I had tenure and I didn't worry about, publications that had to happen in some like high-ranking specialized journals upon which my promotion would have depended, right? So for younger folks, for junior faculty, it's a little bit tricky to get into this field, because it's not, there are no assessment tools yet for what it means to be doing research in these fields. So we have to be clear that there's absolutely cool mathematics happening there, research at the highest level, and the fact that you're partnering with, non-academic organizations is really not, it doesn't mean anything, right? These organizations like FairVote are coming to us with demands at the highest levels of research. So that can be assessed, and it's assessed just like any other research we do. So that's a little bit of a PR that's on us here.
Wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to these collaborations. I do have a bunch more questions in the chat, if I can throw a few more of those at you. We had 3 different people asking about appropriate sizes for legislative bodies. We had someone asking, what's the right ratio for constituents to members? We had someone asking about which rules, which algorithms should you use to decide the appropriate size of the House? So does your book cover that? And what do you think about those questions?
Those are great questions. I have a chapter on that called "The House Hits the Ceiling." So we have 435 members of the House, and this is an atrocity, a mathematical aberration. All right, 435 is there because it was frozen in time in the 1920s because of the politics of the time. The House had, since the founding of the country up until the 1920s, grown with the populations. In fact, Madison and others at the Constitutional Convention said the right ratio of constituents to representatives is between 30 and 50,000. 50 was like the top. Well, that ratio is 760,000 today. It's just impossible for a representative to represent this many people. It's just, they are so far removed from the constituents because of how big the constituency is, that there's a big empty space that, of course, lobbyists and special interest groups fill very, very easily. So what is the right ratio? Well, we can't quite do 30 or 50,000. That would mean we would have like 7,000 representatives or something. That would be a dysfunctional House. But what most democracies have come to is that the right size of the lower house is about the cube root of the population. And there are some papers that observe this and then explain, kind of backtracked and explained, deconstructed this observation, why this makes sense mathematically. You set up a model and there's some differential equations you solve, and out pops this cube root. Vast majority of democracies follow the cube root rule, whether they know it or not. They've just arrived at this. And the US followed it up until 1920s. So if we follow the cube root rule, we would have about 700 people in the House. And that seems to be the optimal thing. This is not a popular thing. If you say someone on the street, I want to increase the House of Representatives, they would just laugh at you. But we would have a much better functioning democracy if that were the case.
And I'm a fan of how that House expansion might work well with the Fair Representation Act. If you look at a state like Massachusetts that's dominated by representatives from a single party, if we did not expand the House, some members of that majority party would lose their seats. And that politically is challenging. If you expanded the House, those folks would be able to hold on to their seats, or at least their party probably would, while also creating space for representatives from minority parties. And so I loved in your book how you brought all these concepts together. You showed that these things are intrinsically linked. We do have some questions here about next steps for moving this forward. We have someone in the audience, it looks like from the Better Ballot, South Carolina. Welcome. So they introduced a bill. It got sponsored, but it never even got out of committee in their state legislature. So do you address in your book the establishment's built-in bias against changes like this and how we can address that?
Right, that's one of these difficult questions of what happens in the trenches, right? We address it with just, objectivity, right? That these methods, these suggestions that I make, they're really not, they're not partisan. Evidence shows that they are better. And there's, as you can sort of see this as the popularity of ranked choice grows, so does the opposition, right? We see a more organized opposition happening now, and states banning ranked choice, et cetera. So that's political and cultural, and people are just. One of the mistakes that my son was making, he was going around telling people the way we vote sucks. It's absurd. It's like he was kind of a little bit aggressive about it, and we can't do that, right? We have to be inclusive and open and say, look, we've been voting a certain way, it's fine, but we can do better. And then if we can just capture 2 minutes of their time to explain how, say, ranked choice works, nobody's against it once they know how it works, right? So I think sort of education and kind of staying the course with just the facts and evidence, that's as an academic, that's how I would approach it. Now, how it works in South Carolina on the ground, it might be a different story. But this is a very unsatisfying answer, and I apologize.
No, it's a great answer. I mean, there's always layers to these kinds of questions. I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to give you a tough one here. This is from Tom. Unfortunately, academia is touted as untrustworthy by some political factions. So how do you have thoughts about reaching folks who distrust science and math?
Yeah, probably the same answer as the previous question. Whenever someone gives me the time of day for me to explain things like, the faults of the Electoral College from a mathematical point of view, right? Or the problems with vote splitting and spoiler effects from a mathematical point of view, they are really disarmed because it's math. It's clear that I'm not partisan in any way. All of my examples, have Republican elections and Democrat elections, but then they have candidates A, B, C, and D, and I do something with it. It's removed from reality when I explain how this works, and invariably everybody's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So this is how I try to disarm people, and yes, there is an unprecedented mistrust in higher education. It's a topic of conversation on my campus, as on every other campus, I'm sure, in America, daily, and we're not quite sure how to counter it, other than stay the course as far as education. But again, math, we have an easier job in math than people in other disciplines do because of this detachment. And I come back to the detachment word, my favorite, the word of the day for me, because of this detachment. And it's not hard to recognize that we are indeed detached and not partial when we talk about things like electoral reform and all these other mathematically sound things we could do to improve democracy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We are at a quarter till the hour, so this is about the end of our time together. I will note we got a number of questions in the chat as you were speaking about single winner systems that asked you to specifically compare RCV to one other system. We had one person asking for a comparison to star voting, one person for a comparison to Condorcet voting, and another person for a comparison to approval voting. And so for those folks, I would say check out the book. Ismar, I thought you did a great job covering all of those different methods and the different considerations in the book. Is there anything you would like to leave folks with in terms of comparing those different systems and how best to approach that?
I would say that they are each good systems, right? Certainly any of them, they're all better than what we do now, right? So if we implemented any of them, I would be happy. But again, there's nuances in how they operate and how people are positioned in terms of them, how they approach them, how they regard voting in certain ways. And I think that makes quite a bit of difference ultimately. So this is why I went with instant runoff. It's natural for us to kind of rank things, pit things against one another. That's another reason why I'm not as enthusiastic about range or approval. We naturally kind of like to rank things. We do it all the time as we order food in a restaurant, right? Like your favorite choice, then your next choice. In case they're out of the first thing, you're ready with the next thing, right? So you're doing some ranked voting there. So yeah, it's very nuanced. I'm not. It's subtle, right? I'm not saying, right, like this system's terrible, this one is way better. No, the differences are subtle and nuanced, and I think they have to be regarded as such and absorbed. And I Deb, thank you for saying a couple of times that I try to do this in an objective way in this book.
We also had someone asking when your TED Talk is coming. So keep that in mind for future book promotion.
As soon as somebody invites me to give one, I'll give it. I love doing so. If anybody who's listening has, wants me to come and appear to talk to any groups, etc., I love doing this. It's very different from, again, everything I've done academically so far. It's very exciting. It's very new for me. And, like, catch me while I'm still excited.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ismar. I will go ahead and wrap us up. So thanks to Ismar for joining me today. Once again, the book is called Making Democracy Count: How Mathematics Improves Voting, Electoral Maps, and Representation. We're pleased to offer a discount for those of you who joined us and who want to purchase a copy. So I put this in the chat for the webinar today as a thank you for joining us. The code is Volić30 to get 30% off at Princeton University Press. So feel free to use that code. And thank you again for joining us. We will post this webinar on our YouTube and social channels in the coming days. That is at FairVote on YouTube and Twitter, and at FairVote Reform on Facebook. So keep an eye out for those, and you'll have an opportunity to share this with anyone else in your life who might be interested in the topic. As always, keep an eye out for future webinars, blogs, and reports from FairVote. We look forward to seeing you soon, and you can look up Ismar and bring him in to any other speaking engagements and promotions that you may have out there. So thanks everyone for joining us. Please have a good day.
Thank you so much.